All right, it's time to talk basketball. Yes, it's the off season, but man, there's no off season for us. I'm Jose Salviati, editor at thepeakbasket.net. He's Steve Purciello, longtime educator, vice principal, high school coach, and athletic director. And this is the 13 Rules Overtime podcast. This is a show where we discuss NBA stars from the 60s, 70s, and 80s by talking about them with someone who actually watched them play. It's one thing, and you've seen these clips on YouTube where people talk about rewatch a show or a series from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then they comment on it, which is great. And there's value there for sure. But we're talking about somebody who watched it back in that time. And I think that adds a little bit of wonder to this. What made these players special? What player today most resembles that player? And the guy who watched them is Steve. And what was Steve's greatest memory about that player? So I think it's a kind of a cool show. Maybe that's patting ourselves on the back, but I have a lot of fun talking about these guys. These are all players I've heard of, but really never got to see play. Didn't know a whole lot about them other than what you hear. But there's more to these guys. To date, we've discussed Will Chamberlain, Sam Jones, Rick Barry, Pistol, Pete Maravich, and Bill Russell. Today, we're going to discuss a player that Steve and I have talked about a lot in our conversations about those other guys. We talked about his long shot without giving too much away. We talked about his ability to take over games, but we've never talked about him. This is a player who had an impact on the game on the court and off the court after his playing career was over as an executive. He's a Hall of Famer, NBA champion, 14-time All-Star, scoring leader 1 year, assist leader 1 year, 4-time All-Defensive First Team. This guy was an all-around player. And in his own words, he was a wolf. Specifically, he said the word dog comes up a lot. I was a wolf. Okay. I used to eat dogs. The person we're talking about is the great Jerry West. I'm shocked that we haven't talked about him yet. I did not get to watch him play. Obviously, I feel like I know this guy because when I go to Laker games, he was there. When I went to Clipper games, he was there. So I saw him, I never interacted with him, but saw him from a distance. And he's a legend, man. He's the logo, but he was a pretty spectacular player. So let's start there, Steve. You watched him play. You got to see the Wolf up close against your favorite team. What made Jerry West a Wolf? What made him special?
First of all, let's remember his nickname was Mr. Clutch.
Yeah.
Being a clutch, it tells you everything you want to know about him. He was so good, he can carry teams on his back. One of the first things I watched a lot of his career, not a lot, but a couple of years of it. But I do remember the 69 finals. In the first two games, he scored 53 and 41 in the first two games, which is incredible. In that time, he could shoot. He can do so many different things. And when you said four-time all-defensive player, the interesting piece to that was the first time they had an all-defensive team was in 69. So the last 4 or 5 years of his career were the only times he could have been all-defense. So you have to remember that. The sad thing is, I think they lost to Boston 8 times in the finals.
Yeah.
They won one title in his playing career, and that's
Mhm.
a sad thing because he was so good. Interesting thing, he was at West Virginia. He grew up in West Virginia. Another nickname was Zeke from Cabin Creek because that was right near where his home was. He played for West Virginia. Then he went to the Lakers. In fact, the Minneapolis Lakers are the team that drafted him, but he played for the LA Lakers. That was the end of the Minneapolis Lakers. They became the LA. And the other interesting piece to that was the Lakers hired his college coach to become his coach in the NBA, Fred Schaus,
Mm,
which is a very interesting thing. And then he went with the Lakers and played with them for what, about 14 or 15 years, 14 years, I believe.
my career.
And he had a tremendous career. And interesting trivia for your friends, who was the only guy to be a finals MVP without winning the championship. And it was West in 69. That was the series where he had 53 and 41 in the first two games. And I'm trying to remember, I was thinking about it before. Boston lost those two games. They won the next two. If I remember right, did everything they could to shut him down. They were doubling and throwing everything at him they possibly could to take him away because he was that good. And don't forget, that team had Wilt and old Elgin Baylor on the team. And
Yeah.
he was the factor that was just going crazy on Boston. And fortunately, Havlicek had a pretty good series as well. But that was the amazing part of West. Now, if you've ever read his book, which is a great book, West will talk about how that just those games, those series, all the losses to Boston really ate him up, and really did a lot to him. But in my mind, as a player, I haven't seen many guards as good as him and also as total players. Most great guards or great players are offensive players, not both. Jerry West was both, and Jerry West was real. In that day, it was him and Oscar. And there was a little argument. Oscar usually won about who was better, but they were head and shoulders above everybody as great guards. And this was, I didn't see Bob Cousy. I barely remember as a little kid seeing him, but this was after Bob Cousy played. So it gives you a little bit about Wes and what he could do. Just an incredible player. They did win a title in 72. I believe they beat the Buck, but they lost twice to the Knicks in the famous 69 series where Willis came out all beat up. But in that series, West made that 60-footer to put a game into overtime.
Which
And
would have won it today as a
oh, yeah,
three-pointer.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Don't and that's the amazing thing. Jerry West probably, again, and forget the point totals and all that, he would have scored a hell of a lot more points if the three-point line was there
Right.
because he could shoot. The interesting thing too, if you ever watch tape of him, he's usually always going right with the ball. But again, he was just unstoppable, just a shooter. In game 7 in 69, it's one of my early memories against Boston. They were down by 13, 14 and going into the fourth quarter. And he was like a one-man gang, brought
Yeah.
them into the game. And just like, what do you do? How do you stop this guy? You
Yeah.
don't. You don't is the answer. So
There
those some of the things I remembered about.
there were two things that struck me as I did a little research, right, in preparation for this conversation. First off, I saw the fourth quarter of that game in 1969, and I was just blown away by the skill. It's amazing watching him take over the game. He was just head and shoulders above everybody else. And you feel like you watching it, he made up his mind, okay, I'm putting the Lakers on my back and I'm gonna go get this game. And he almost did. But the other thing that shocked me, because I did not realize it, was he was a good defender, right? Four-time, yeah, we brought it up, four-time first team. What was he? Let me ask it this way, because the other thing I didn't know, Oscar Robertson and him were drafted in the same class. Oscar went first and Jerry went second, which is unbelievable. But was he the first really good guard that put an emphasis on defense?
Oscar did too. Oscar could play
Oh,
too.
did he?
Yeah, he was a good all around player. Also, they both were, and I think there was some number of guys that had good reputations. A little bit later, Walt Frazier comes along. He was considered a great defender. John Havlicek was a great defender, as he was more of a guard forward. He was 6'5" at that time. That would be like a 3 in the game. But yeah,
Mm,
those were good defenders. But West just did it all, and I was just reading a little bit to prepare for this, and it said something interesting I didn't know. In that 69 series, game 3, Boston doubled him a lot, but more importantly, he was running out of gas because he was doing so much for the Lakers, but
sure.
he still was able to play a game 7 the way he did. And Boston, if I remember correctly, they threw everything at him, every way they could trying to stop him. Other years, that was maybe the first time that the Lakers had the better team in the finals. Other years, the Celtics were better, and the Lakers came close. And I think to his death, I think losing all those series was like a killer for him. Losing 8 series in
Yeah.
total was a killer. The other interesting thing was he and Bill Russell became pretty good friends after they were both out of the game, which Russell was his tormentor, but he still thought how good Russell was. You showed film now of him, just incredible.
Just some highlights. So I got to ask you, because you mentioned that he was the only player to ever get finals MVP on the losing side, right? And I think personally, if my team wins, I would take offense to that, man. It's like, how can the losing team win the finals MVP? It doesn't make any sense. Did Boston accept that? Did they
Yes,
care?
yeah, there was
Okay.
no doubt. There was no doubt. There was no doubt he was the best. Havlicek was the other good player in that series. He had a bunch of points in the first 2 games also. but there was no doubt that Jerry West was head and shoulders over everybody. And
Wow.
that was a series. Don't forget, that was the series where Will, with 5 minutes left in game seven,
Wow.
hurt and then wanted to go back. So the attention really wasn't on that. And don't forget, I think that might have been the first MVP ever in the finals. So there wasn't like it is now, all that attention given to it. And it wasn't important at that time. Winning was. And so people didn't quite like even think of it that way. And he was so dominant that there was really little choice they had to make in giving it to him.
Yeah. Wow. Let's, I
We
would
didn't
say
get
it.
in we didn't get into his executive career and he coached for 3 years.
Yeah.
More importantly, as an executive, he won with 2 different groups, which is pretty difficult in the game as a Laker executive, and meaning the Shaq group. And then earlier than that, he won with with Gasol, I believe, in that group, and Kobe. But he worked with the Warriors.
Right.
And for 3 years, he was their consultant, and then won a couple titles while he was with them. And also, he was the GM of the Memphis Grizzlies for a couple of
Yep.
years in between. And I think he had a little feud at the end with not Jerry Buss, with his daughter, where he didn't want any part of the Lakers. It's like,
Yeah, that's so sad. That still stings here in LA. He finished his career impacting the Los Angeles Clippers, had a big impact on the Clippers franchise. But yeah, his career didn't end well, unfortunately, in Los Angeles, which is sad. But you bring up a great point. He was not only just a phenomenal player, but just an incredibly impactful executive. Had an impact on both sides, which is pretty rare. I got to ask you, and this is always my favorite question to ask when we talk about these players, who in the modern game most resembles Jerry West?
Kobe. But I'll say this, I think Jerry West was better. But Kobe defended, Kobe could score, Kobe can do everything, and so could Jerry West.
Yeah.
Again, if you're gonna put a Mount Rushmore from the '60s and '70s, I think he's on there. Well, now that's a very difficult thing to say because you got some great players that played, Russell and Chamberlain right off, as well as there's others, but and Elgin Baylor and so on. But you have to think about putting in Cousy. I'm thinking players off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
I have to think that Jerry West would be on that.
Yeah. It's really, I love that you said Kobe, right? Because when I started to really become a fan of the game, and I had been a while at this point, but I know how instrumental Jerry West was in bringing Kobe to Los Angeles. He saw the 17-year-old kid, and he sold Shaq on the 17-year-old kid, basically traded everybody to bring in Shaq. And then
He didn't trade. He was a free agent, Shaq.
he let go. He said essentially he cleared house to have the money to bring in Shaq.
Essentially, what the Lakers have always done is never develop. They brought players in. That's what the Showtime, and
Yep.
that's how the Lakers are. Other teams develop, but everybody wants to play in LA. So they're able to go out when they have the money and get the free agent they want. That's just the way it works. And the Lakers are smart in taking advantage of being in LA. So it works where other outside of New York, and the Knicks have not always been the most smartest in doing things,
Yeah.
but outside of New York, I don't think many players want to go to Memphis or many players want to play in
Yeah. Yeah.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
So
Oklahoma City. Yeah.
yeah, so that's a major thing. And he did sign Shaq and he did move things. And the other thing I want to correct you on, and this is very interesting, Kobe told a bunch of teams he wasn't going to play with them. And he fell into the Lakers' lap, meaning Kobe picked his team. When you go back and look at it, Kobe, I believe Charlotte maybe, and I think the Nets had a chance to take him. I'm not positive on that, but Kobe didn't. He wanted no part of it, and he wanted to go. He wanted to go, and it worked out quite well. And the
Yeah.
other thing people miss, his Kobe's first year, he was not. He struggled.
First
Uh,
2 years.
right.
So he was a kid, right? He was a kid playing a grown man's game, and it looked like it. The thing is, he still had that incredible confidence. So he kept taking the shots he shouldn't have. But yeah, the Lakers and Jerry West finagled that trade with Charlotte, brought in Kobe. But I love that you compared the two because
Well,
they're linked forever,
couple interesting things too I didn't even bring up. He was an Olympic champ in 1960,
right?
college player of the year, West Virginia. There's so many other things that Jerry West did that people aren't aware of and don't realize how good he is. Like I said, a great book. I think it was an autobiography, but a couple of years ago came out on his life, and it's excellent. It's an excellent read. The other thing too, he was wrapped really tight. As a Laker GM, he couldn't watch games. He really never got over losing to the Celtics all those times.
Right.
So he was really wrapped very tight in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And that's probably what propelled him to being so great. Um,
100%.
you know,
It's like the curse, right? It's the curse that drives you, and I think that probably had a lot to do with why he was the logo and as good as he was, and it's timely, right? He just passed away just a few months ago, June of this year, but an all-time great, and, man, what a great conversation. Again, I just really enjoy these talks. I enjoy learning more about these players, and excited to find out who is next. I think there's the thing we're tossing around right now is going back to Boston for 1970s great. We'll see where that lands. But that's it. Hope you enjoyed learning about Jerry West, learning more about the great Jerry West. We do have some people that we think we'd like to discuss, but if you've got somebody in mind, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. As always, please subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff means so much. And we appreciate you taking the time to listen. Join us again next week on 13 Rules Overtime when we discuss another NBA great from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Thanks, Steve.
thank you.